Welcome, everyone. Great to have you with us on this next episode of Belonging HE. And we've got a really special guest with us today. Has been a co-facilitator with me in different kind of spaces and worked together in Advanced HE, but also just has become a good friend over the years. So I'm gonna just start by reading off your bio, Dom. Thank you for joining us. So Dr. Dom Jackson Cole has over 2 decades of experience as a trainer and facilitator across a variety of sectors. Dom has worked with community leaders, students, academics, and executives in the UK, Australia, Belgium, Brazil, China, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Poland, Singapore, and the Netherlands, not to mention the US and the UK. He was a member of the university's UK Advisory Board on tackling racial harassment, which published national guidance on dealing with racial harassment on campus. Don was also contributed to a mini documentary, Is Higher Education Failing Black Students, directed by Remini Love, which aired in 2020 on BBC One. Dom has worked in the UK higher education since 2007 as a policymaker, researcher, practitioner with expertise in the fields of widening participation, equality, diversity, and inclusion, and particularly as it pertains to race equity. Dom's PhD concentrated on race and specifically racism in postgraduate STEM education in England. His current research interests include anti-racist pedagogy and decoloniality. Most recently, Dom was a senior advisor for EDI at Advanced HE, where he advised universities in the UK internationally on the diversity and inclusion solutions and strategies. Dom continues to work for Advanced HE on a consultancy basis. Previously, Dom obtained a master's degree in education from the University of Cambridge, worked at the Higher Education Funding Council, or HEFCE then, the sector regulator for higher education, and at Kingston University helped to become the sector leader in efforts to close racialized degree awarding gaps, and at SOAS University London. Dom has worked with a multitude of institutions and companies as well. Dom, thank you so much. That was quite an introduction. And just to preface all of that for our listeners, I think I met Dom first a while back. I think it was 2015 at the Higher Education Race Action Group conference where he was delivering a workshop. And I just remember him being so profound in how he really tackled the deep issues of what was happening in terms of race and higher education. And then we reconnected at Advanced HE many years later. So it's great to have you on the podcast, Dom.
It's great to be here. Hopefully, I can contribute something interesting this time around.
Awesome. So I guess my first question is just, outside of, I guess, the bio, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into higher education and overall, kind of how's the journey been for you?
Sure. So I got into higher education by chance. It was an accident, really. So I was studying for a geography bachelor's because I thought I wanted to be a teacher.
Mhm.
And while I was studying at the University of Northampton, which was absolutely amazing experience, I always praise them because they're really low in the league tables. But out of all my educational experiences, they have shown me the best pedagogy, really. So I love it. So anyway, I was going to see a friend, and I was meeting her in the sports section because she was studying sports. And as I was waiting for her, I saw an ad for a job as a student ambassador for Aim Higher, which was the kind of flagship program of the New Labour for widening participation. I didn't know what about, but it just said, be a student ambassador, participate in our summer school and get paid for it. I was like, that's great. I've been a scout and a scout leader for many years and I've been doing this for free. I can get paid for it. Yeah. So that's how I got into widening participation by accident and using my skills from scouting. So I was a scout leader for 10 years. And through that, obviously, I found out what widening participation is all about. It's about getting people from disadvantaged backgrounds into higher education. I thought, yes, this is great. So that's what I went into. My first job after uni was for Aim Higher. And then obviously the government changed. 2010 came the Tory government or the coalition at the time. And the program was cut. So I had to go and do something else. I went to do my master's. Then I went to work for HEFCE and I started doing my PhD. And that's where I realized that WP wasn't cutting everything. So I realized that it was focusing mainly on social class. And the irony is that when we talk about social class, we mean white people, right? Even though when we talk about Black people, we mean working class. So there's this irony there. And so WP was a very white space. And actually, when you're getting students into the university, what are you doing then? So that's how I switched into equality, diversity, and inclusion. And throughout my PhD and this anti-racist work, I realized that it also needs a lot more on pedagogy. And that's how I got into decoloniality. But I'll talk about that later, I guess. My journey has been really positive, and I guess a lot of it is thanks to my wonderful personality, but really thanks to my whiteness. And it wasn't until I was doing my PhD that I realized how much my whiteness has helped me. I then looked back onto my journey and I looked at, for example, at Hefty, I was praised for just doing my job. I was like, why is this person? There was a senior person that really took a liking to me, and she was praising me all over the place. And my colleague did the same thing. They didn't get praised. I got praised. Why is that? Right? And the only thing, she probably didn't know that she was a white person. She is a white person. I think she's still alive. I don't know. So I slowly started realizing through looking back at these small moments that I've never had an issue. I was able to mask my difference. So for example, when I graduated from Cambridge with my master's, I thought I would be flooded with jobs. I wasn't. But after sending applications to about 50 jobs and getting absolutely nowhere, I was advised to remove my Polishness from my CV. So I'm Polish and I also have a British passport, so Polish and British. And as soon as I did that, as soon as I removed the word Polish Scouting Association and I just left Scouting Association, and as soon as I removed my Polish degree and just left my English degree and my Cambridge degree, and with my name, Dom Jackson Cole, you can't really tell, but I'm not British. All I had to do was send out CV or applications to 3 jobs, got 3 interviews, and got a job. Wow. Right? So I was able to navigate the system. And, Polish people are white, obviously, but there's an association of Poles with manual labor, not university work, right? So I guess that kind of unconscious bias was working against me and then in my favor as well. Because until I opened my mouth, I am assumed British. So it's been pretty smooth, can't complain. And for the last 2 years, I've been working freelance and it's been going pretty well as well. Yeah. And it's a fascinating place because just when you think you know something, somebody is here to prove you otherwise. And I've been proven otherwise at Kingston, I've been proven otherwise at SOAS, and I've somehow managed to get people on board of the program. So that's been great.
And that's so powerful because just hearing your journey, it's on one hand you're saying actually my whiteness has elevated me, or I can notice that it's given me advantages, but on the other hand almost a kind of minoritization of your name, the ethnic sounding name has also been a disadvantage, and you've had to learn how to navigate that in different spaces. I would say I've learned so much from you just around the pedagogy piece, the curricula, and really understanding how some of these elements around, race, but not just race, I guess, all the other intersectional characteristics can interact with the learning experience, right? I guess my question to you is, from your experience and your research in the area, what do you feel is missing from the conversation about inclusive pedagogy in higher education at the moment?
Sure. So I guess before really answering this, we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by inclusive pedagogy? Because my definition of inclusive pedagogy is that it's just pedagogy. Good pedagogy is inclusive pedagogy. So if it's not inclusive, then it's not pedagogy for me. It's not real learning, right? It's learning for a very specific subsection of society and learning in a very specific way that then contributes to the reproduction of the privileges that they have. So it's not really transformative. We always talk about education being transformative. I don't think it is if we're just serving a very narrow part of the society. So then what is inclusive pedagogy? It's just pedagogy. But if you type into Google inclusive pedagogy, what you usually get is issues of accessibility for disabled students or for students with learning difficulties, right? Which now more and more we're learning they're just neurodivergence, right? Because if you mind everything about writing an exam and you have dyslexic students, they're just as capable of knowing what you want them to know. But if they have to express it through writing, then that will be a problem. So that's something to be said, because that's the kind of initial idea of inclusive pedagogy is just disabilities or people with who are disabled by society. And then comes into that, then the wider understanding is anti-racist pedagogy, LGBTQ friendly pedagogy, and so on. So you've got little pockets. And I think one of the big problems with inclusive pedagogy is that people focus on one bit and then forget the rest, and then one bit and forget the rest. And we see this with anti-racist education. Suddenly 2020 came and Black Lives Matter blew up for everyone on the screen. And so everybody was like, inclusive pedagogy, anti-racist pedagogy, decolonization. 2024, you don't hear about it. Right? Have we solved racism? We haven't, right? So there's those waves, and I think that's the problem. And the answer to this question really depends on your stance. I take a decolonial point of view as much as I can as a white person. And when you think about decoloniality, first of all, you have to understand what coloniality is about. So it's about power relations being affected by the colonial powers and continuing until now after colonization. It has affected knowledge, hugely affected knowledge, whose knowledge matters, what knowledge is seen as valid, and what has happened to other knowledges. It's about being, because all of this has been affecting who we are. So we have become white and black since colonization, right? Before that wasn't the case. Various indigenous groups in South America became Indian, right? So it changed who we are. But all of this, so this is the theory of coloniality and decoloniality. There's coloniality of power, knowledge, and being. But I'm working with my colleagues, Lucia Kula from SOAS and Joris Leshen, who's an activist and decolonial storyteller. We're working on this, and we've noticed that there's an element missing, which is connection. So you can only create new being if you sever connections with the old, right? Only dehumanize other person if you sever your connection with humanity. We can only exploit nature if we sever our connection with nature itself, right? Because if you look at, for example, South American and all the indigenous really epistemologies and ontologies, there's no difference between human and nature.
Right.
It's only thanks to capitalism that we are separating. This is human who is superior, and this is nature that is inferior, therefore we can exploit it, right? So taking all of this into higher education, we're missing connectedness. We are not connected at all. We have different disciplines, right? We have compartmentalized them. You're not connecting with how knowledge is really produced, because we're just focusing on writing, and other forms of knowledge are getting in there. But you can't have an academic article, peer-reviewed academic article, which is this, talking, right? You can't have, right? So all of it is really disconnected. So I think we need to connect. We need to reorganize everything. Think about it in a very decolonial, connected way, how we connect to our humanness, our diversity, because we are all diverse. We're not this specific able-bodied Christian white male learner, ideal learner that higher education has been thought of for many centuries now. We're not that. Even that white man is not that, you know? So that's the kind of maybe high-level philosophical response to that question, but I think that connectedness is really important. And I guess I'll talk about it more, but that's just the kind of initial thought.
Yeah, no, that it sounds really interesting, because I've never thought about it like that. And I know the word decolonizing has become a metaphor for so many different things.
Yeah.
And so, but when you bring it down to that connectedness, you can start to really, even the connectedness to history, and bringing that back and through, and that threading through. My question is, what? So I think back to, because a lot of the challenges, higher education was created for a specific demographic before, and widening participation since the 90s changed that. But even what you're saying before, there was no connectedness, as it were, between we're letting more students, but we're not considering what they need to succeed, right? So I guess my question is, what's the difference between connectedness and belonging for you, or what does that relationship look like in terms of, yeah.
I think belonging is a result of connectedness, because you're not going to belong anywhere if you don't connect with that place, right? If you feel alienated from this place, then you don't belong to it. So I think once we started talking about, I think it was 2012, the report What Works in HE, and it was talking all about belonging. And I think that's where we started thinking about it, or went into the right way of thinking about it. It's not going as far yet, because again, it's just belonging. It's all about belonging. It's not all about belonging. It's about everything, right? Yeah, and you said HE has been created, this Western HE, but there's other ways of having a university that is not Western, right? So we can expand that. And definitely, again, connection, belonging, for me, it's very connected. But I wanted to say something, how disconnected all of the attempts to improve higher education are. And this is the problem, that we're only trying to improve higher education as it is now, rather than completely reorganize it, right? If you're really thinking about decoloniality, then we need to rethink completely, destroy the structures that we have now, and build new structures with all the knowledge of the world, not just the Western knowledge as the hegemonic knowledge, but and other knowledges as, we'll take a little bit of here, a little bit of there, and we'll put it and call it decoloniality. No, that's not decoloniality. Decoloniality is about building new things with all the learning of the world. But for now, it's very disconnected. So I remember when I was doing my master's, and I interviewed head of a WP at one of the Oxbridge institutions, and he told me all about how amazing their work was, how they were getting students into the university, and it was so great. I'm like, yeah, it sounds amazing. And so what do you do once the students are at university? I asked that question. And he was like, nothing. It has worked for 800 years this way, so it will work now. I'm like, wow. There's a bit of disconnect here, right? Because 800 years ago, those universities did not have any diversity, right? They didn't have women. They didn't have a huge chunk of their students being international students, Muslim students, Black students, and so on, right? So you have to change something. It's not just the students that you have to mold into the old way. You have to change as well. So there's this connection at every point of higher education. And once you start connecting, you'll have that belonging. So for me, belonging is an outcome of connectedness, I guess. Yeah.
Wow. Sorry, this is so profound. This is because I haven't heard much new thought that has made me think, actually, because what you're saying, and if I got this right, from an overarching view, if we were to focus on having connected institutions and connected learners, many of the disparities and so forth would work themselves out. And I'm already thinking about, disconnections, not just in, I guess, the student experience, but even the way we might departmentalize, learning, or, and there could be more cross collaboration. I think we're going into an era where we need more cross collaboration, more subjects working together and so forth.
Yeah.
For you, though, and just to say as a side note, Dom, I think this is a book coming on. So I want to say after the air, I definitely think this is definitely worth a book of research. But where do you think the start needs to happen when we start to think about this connected, I don't even know what to call it, experience, a journey, or just a framework, like a philosophy? Like, where does that start, or where can it start?
That's a very good question, but I probably don't have the answer to. And it's somewhere where I would ask for community to come up with that answer. Because one of the ways for me that is important in working in the colonial way is to create communities. right? So I think community would have the answers to it. So knowledge production as it is now is very individualized. We reference an individual, right? Such and such said this. Smith 2022 said this, right? But that knowledge wasn't created just by them. It was created by everything around them, by the community that they came from, right? So they're already connected to knowledge. And so why aren't we recognizing the communities that are creating those knowledges? So I think I would ask communities, where do we start with that connectedness? But I think looking to coloniality and decoloniality as framework, the first step is always by understanding the current state. So analyzing where we are at through the colonial lens. And that, thanks to that, you start understanding that those disciplines that are so separated, that's on purpose, that's coloniality working to make us specialize in one way. So you're a specialist in sociology, not in psychology. For example, this is a big thing that for me is always missing. I'm a sociologist, but where's the psychology of it, right? Mm-hmm. So you're a specialist in something, and you go in there, you're very ignorant about a lot of other things. And that actually helps to maintain coloniality because you don't see the entire picture. So you're not going to try to change the system, right? So we've been compartmentalized like this. We've been compartmentalized in our work. We're still like a Ford factory. You just do a little bit in your life, right? So I think the first thing is contextualizing where we're at with a decolonial perspective, realizing that those things do not work. And it's difficult because universities have been made, they've always participated in coloniality, but they've been made recently more and more monetized. And so they depend on the market. It's a neoliberal idea of university. And thanks to this, the whole idea has been sold to us as university will get you jobs. We know that's not true anymore. But if university has to live in the market, in capitalism, then it's not going to produce anything against capitalism. So it's a very vicious circle of coloniality that has led universities to work very efficiently for coloniality. Because universities, ultimately, we can do all the change in universities and create these amazing people to go out to the world of work, and they're not going to get any jobs because they're thinking too critically about it all, right? It's people complain about Gen Z that they don't want to work. And I'm like, yeah, great. Because life is not just about working, or it shouldn't be just about working, right?
And equally, they're seeing, YouTube influencers or even Twitter influencers making so much money. The world's changing, and it is changing. And that's, I think, one of the things that Haiti is grappling with at the moment, because, yes, how do you maneuver in a capitalist framework when it just feels like there's so much change happening so quickly? And I don't want to use the words AI, but I have. But, with all of this, it does become, I guess, more focused on outputs and outcome. But then that links back to what you said earlier about, the disconnect between, okay, we're getting in widening access students, but we don't know what's going to happen next because we've just told to be focused on this one area. We haven't really thought about the whole picture in that sense.
It's interesting that you brought in AI, because I think sometimes when I'm feeling really down, I think that the world is going to end by 2030. And I think it's going to be because of AI, because of wars, and because of climate change, right? All other days, I'm more optimistic, and I hope that we use AI for the good stuff, right? But it is getting more and more difficult. But I think what will have to happen is there's going to have to be some kind of revolution, because our society might collapse one way or another if we have the climate change completely rearranging our society. Then it will only get worse. So unless we want to continue on that path and see worsening of our conditions, millennials are already worse off than their parents' generation, right? And Gen Z are worse off than millennials. Right. So if we just want to keep on going down that path, then it's not going to be sustainable. We know it's not sustainable. We know the earth is going to start changing drastically. So we need a revolution. And I don't mean a bloodshed revolution.
Mm.
I think the colonial revolution has to come, and that's through education. So that's where we start, education. And I think that every politician knows the value of education. That's why educational reforms are always the first things that people go for when they get into power, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a bit cynical about this. Most ruling classes don't want their citizens to be too smart, too critical thinkers, because they're afraid they will lose the power, right? But yeah, we need a revolution.
Awesome. No, and so that brings me on to my next question, and actually moving this forward into a bit around degree awarding, and we're not going to go too in depth, but one of the things that came out of the pandemic, as you're very aware, is that certain things helped a variety of students, one really being assessment, and the whole sector having to rethink, all this time we've been doing assessment one way, a pandemic comes along, certain changes are made, and certain groups do better. And in essence, I guess what the messaging has been is that assessments became slightly more inclusive. A question to you then is, what can practitioners be thinking about, or what do you think they should be thinking about when they start to think about inclusive assessment and
Sure.
moving it forward?
Well, again, you'll see this being very repetitive from me because I'll be looking at it through the colonial lens and connectedness as well. We live in HE that is very disconnected. So a teacher is a teacher. That's it. They're the only sole source of knowledge and power. And student is a student. They're the kind of empty vessel to fill in, right? And that creates division. And so that allows for a bit of dehumanization of students. And so I've come across attitudes where heads of departments were like, all students are cheaters. They have to be exempt at least 8 times in an exam session because coursework is just invitation for cheating. Really? So if we break down those divisions, so Paulo Freire philosophy of critical pedagogy, that the student is the teacher and the teacher is a student as well, more horizontal relations, that will start helping. So what does that mean in practice? Exactly what we have seen in the pandemic. Just ask the students, what would work for them. Give them an open book exam. If you have to do a written exam, give them an open book exam, because in the real world, no one is going to be writing an exam, right? They're going to be collaborating. In higher education, collaboration is called cheating, right? During exam. In real world, it is collaboration. So what we need to do is make our assessment more real world. I know that there's already a thought of this in inclusive assessment. There is already a lot of thinking about real life assessment, but it's definitely that way. And it's not just about bringing the topics from real life, but how we do the assessment, right? Yeah, and allowing students to choose how they want to be assessed best. Obviously, there's a balance between just letting them go with their strengths and also developing certain skills. Right. But it's about teaching and developing certain skills. So if all of your assessment is just summative assessment, just at the end, do this, and you do none of the formative assessment, you don't teach them how to attempt assessment, you don't teach them assessment and feedback literacy, then of course they're going to do not as well as they could. So, I mean, I think a lot of the work that is happening already is really good. So real life assessment, formative assessment, and feedback literacy, all of those things are really good. We just have to think about it in this broader way of connecting it with our humanity, with ourselves, not building the barriers between student and teacher, and connecting with the real world, I think.
Yeah. And I think, it's so interesting because sometimes we say some of these things, and what can happen, as you just mentioned, is, okay, I need to make my assessment real world. I'm going to bring in a real world case study, or I'm going to ask the student to do a reflective journal or something like that. And whilst that's some of it, that is not a complete kind of rethink of the assessment in terms of, is this, it's almost that thought process about assessment for learning or assessment as learning. And when we start to say, okay, can we give assessment choice? Can we, really allow the students to say, here's the theory, here's the principles, here's the way that, the subject knowledge has come over time. How do you think it's best to apply it to solve this problem? And I think that's when we start to get to that notion of authentic assessment. It's not just about bringing in real world concepts.
And if I can add to this, I just remembered such a very simple thing that I had when I was at Northampton, which is really low in the league tables, really bad, right? But it was absolutely amazing. And so what we did, a lot of the learning, loads of formative assessment. And one thing that we did was we were learning how to, for example, write a good essay, how to read actively, and then construct a good argument. And we were doing this on a piece of article that we had to read anyway for whatever it was, geography class, I don't know, clouds or whatever, I can't remember. It was a long time ago, right? And so it was such a simple thing. You were doing your formative assessment, you were developing your academic skills on the knowledge, on the material that is part of your curriculum, right?
Right.
As opposed to doing the development of your skills somewhere else, as you have to go to academic support to do that on some kind of random piece of article that you're not going to use in your life. But here we were using this article for many different things, right? And it's such a basic idea. And I remember I told this idea at a different university many years later where I worked at, university that sees themselves as a very good university. And all the people were like, wow, this is brilliant. I never thought about this. I'm like, really? For 20 years and you haven't thought about such a simple thing?
Right.
Yeah. I think we can learn a lot about teaching and learning from universities that are deemed modern, less prestigious, because actually they are trying so hard to make a name for themselves. They really care about students.
Yeah, 100%. And I've always said they do the majority of the heavy lifting. If you look at all the data, the research, think about value add, yeah, they really, put it in. And on that, I just think, and again, this is why I'm probably gonna push you now to write a book on this, because we're talking about connectedness again, right? That embedding of the academic skills that we expect the student to have, putting it into the degree program provision rather than extracurricular, and then saying to ourselves, okay, by level 4, 5, 6, what do we expect that person to learn, and it to be aligned with the core content, the assessment, whatever it may be, which again talks to connectedness, that they're not doing extra stuff to be able to do the core materials.
Exactly. And with that connectedness, if I may, another thing that I really always promote in all my workshop is assessment that is scaffolded and mapped out across modules and years, right?
Mm-hmm.
No,
Yeah.
you don't have to teach your students everything, all the academic skills in one module. You can do a piece of assessment that you prepare them for in this module, and that will prepare them for the next module, and where they will build on top of this, and then on top of it, and the next year. It seems like it's more difficult because you have to work as a team to map out your program, but it's in the end, it's so worth it because you're gonna save yourself a lot of hassle.
Yeah.
And you will develop a really good student. And
yeah, it's taking that degree program view, which and that can be conflated because you've got different modules, sometimes you've got associate lecturers, visiting lecturers, and so forth. But taking that degree program view and saying, okay, what's the pathway for our students on this program? Okay, so I just want to ask this next question, because I think this is one, knowing that you are an expert in anti-racist pedagogy, I really wanted to ask. So thinking about race and its intersections, so I don't want to just silo off race, but the intersections. 2 questions. Have we made progress? Okay. And if not, or where not, where are we still greatly lagging behind in your view?
Yeah. So when it comes to progress on anti-racism, again, for me, it's built into decoloniality. So it's not just race, as you said, it's everything, it's all of it that is connected. And side note, a lot of institutions take on decoloniality side note from a side note. In a very superficial way, anything is decoloniality as long as we put a few extra resources into our reading list, right? That's not decoloniality. But a lot of universities take on decoloniality as an anti-racist project. And it is anti-racist project, but it's so much more than that, because coloniality impacted our ideas of gender, of race, of all the things that we are. It has impacted our connection with nature, capital, so our connection with work, our connection to power, and so on. So decoloniality is anti-oppression in general, not just anti-racial oppression, right? And the question of progress is this. I always love to quote Malcolm X on this, which he said something about, if you put a knife 6 inches in my back and you pull it out 3 inches, is that progress? Not really. Progress is taking the knife out completely and letting the wound heal, right? So I don't think we have made much progress. Yes, in certain areas, in certain disconnected areas, again. So we have made progress in participation rates. Great. So 97, when New Labour came into power and had aim higher, until now, progression from, I don't know, was it something like 4% of students of color to now 24, 25%? That's a huge progress that we did without positive discrimination, right? So we were lucky enough that we didn't have to resort to that. And I think there's a place and time for positive discrimination. But it's different, right? But that's an overall figure. If we look into details, then we'll see that the elite universities have made very little progress. And most of this came from expansion of higher education, and most of students of color went into less prestigious universities. And even though their journey traveled might be much bigger, they will still not get the same kind of recognition as someone who goes to Oxford universities, right? And again, so they're participating, but they're not belonging because they feel disconnected. They are not getting the grades. They're disconnected from assessment. We're lacking in representation of staff. So where I worked at SOAS was the university or the institution with the most representation of staff, at something 40% of academics were people of color. Everywhere else where you look is just maybe 11% or something like this, maybe 13% by now. So we're still definitely lacking here. And it's not just about the visible diversity. It's not just about putting on someone who looks diverse. It's also about what they connect to as their lived experiences and that are a source of knowledge as well, right? So it's two aspects: it's the visual and the kind of merit of what they're talking about. So as that, the content, obviously, as I said, disciplines very much disconnected and very much looking from a very Western perspective on things. So we still haven't decolonized that. So the progress is very slow. And what is sad is that pandemic, as you said, has shown us that we can be much more inclusive by understanding the needs of other people. And we have given that flexibility to people. And now pandemic has ended. And so all of us are going back to university, to the old model, right? At most, you can work flexibly in terms of you can go to the office only 3 days a week or something like that, right? Working remotely is still a no for most universities. Studying in a very blended way is also problematic. I understand there's logistical issues, but we made it in the pandemic. I think we can make it out of pandemic as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Thinking about then, last question from me. If you were in senior academic leadership, so Office of the Vice Chancellor, covered, and you was tasked to try to solve educational inequity, what would be your broad priority areas to address, right? So I guess this might not be things that you can do yourself, but to influence change across the board.
I think I would need to be much higher than that because I would change the world. Right. I think the big issue, again, connectedness and disconnection, that universities are disconnected from the world. We have built up walls, literal physical walls. You'll see most universities, some will have an open campus, but not really. So even city-based universities like UCL, they will have walls around it. All the colleges of Oxbridge have walls. Northampton didn't have walls, but was in a remote part of the city, right? So we have separated ourselves from the society, both physically and epistemically. So we use words like epistemology or ontology that nobody out of university will understand, right? So really, I think we need to decolonize by connecting to the world. So we need to decolonize our curriculum, decolonize the structures of university, and try to decolonize the world in some shape or another. So I think what we need for that is a complete reorganization of disciplines so that they can promote the new world order, as it were. But to do that, we also have to understand how world works, but not see it. We're very good at observing the world. Obviously, this is scientific method is observing the world, right? Unfortunately, it just becomes observing the world through it for false kind of fake conditions of experiment. But we're good at observing the world, but we do it with a colonial bias. So what we need to do is start looking at the world, how it really works, because coloniality puts everything into binaries. Men, women, and that's not how gender works, right? Straight, LGBTQ, right? White, black. There's much more variety. There's also much more variety than just the core, the West, and the global South. There's more variety than that. So if we start looking at the world without the colonial bias, and that means including on par knowledges of other societies than the Western society. So if we start creating knowledge that is built up of all knowledge of the world, and then we can start organizing our universities around that. So that the disciplines would be very different, completely different. So it would be all connected. And a big thing would be not exactly universal design for learning, but definitely the principles of the universal design for learning. So multiplicity of the ways we can engage with students and engage with students, the way we can allow students to express themselves and the way we express ourselves, and representation, our representation, staff and student representation, and the switching of the roles as well, like mixing all of this so that there's no disconnect. So that's where I would start. So it's a big thing, obviously, reorganizing the disciplines. If you're the only university doing this, you're going to be told you're crazy, and soon you will lose all the students that just want to make money to survive in a capitalist society. So that might be difficult, but definitely the principles of universal design for learning, but multiple ways of engaging, expressing, and representing would definitely help a lot in the learning process.
I guess what I'm hearing you say, and when you started, you'd need to be higher up. It almost feels like it is a policy intervention first, because everyone's working towards the framework that exists, the regulations that we have to abide by. And so, yeah, it sounds like more of a policy intervention. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I told you that I was studying geography to become a teacher. And thanks to Aim Higher, I realized that being a teacher would not change anything. I would change individual lives within the system, but it's the system that needs to change. And so I went in widening participation and EDI thinking that I am changing the system. But again, working in single institutions is not enough.
Right.
You're still working, as you just said, you're still working inside the system. So you need to work on policies. But then probably if I got to that level of working on policies, I would soon realize that I need a global response, because coloniality is global, right? So yeah, it might sound like it's too big, too scary, but I always think that you don't need to change the world per se, just change the world around you.
Yeah.
And that will trickle down a little bit.
Awesome. And just on that, actually, and just to conclude, do you have any initial steps and initial top tips? I don't want to reduce all that we've spoken about into just a few sound bites, but I'm conscious that I've got someone listening at the moment who's, I want to do something on my course. I want to do something for my students. I don't have all the power. I can't change systems, but what can I at least embark on in the here and now? Is
Yeah.
there any initial thoughts that you could contribute, I guess, to their thinking?
Sure. After decades of studying, I'm gonna say this in one sentence. No, I can't. But what I would say is that, again, my bias is coloniality, decoloniality, right? So getting to know what decoloniality is really all about, not that sloganization of decoloniality, oh, it's just adding a few resources. No, really get to know what it's about. It's about knowledge, the impact of knowledge or coloniality on knowledge, on power, on being, and on connections. So starting with that will help you really see what changes you need to make. And there was one more thing that I thought I could say, and I completely forgot right now. It always happens.
Take your time, it will come back to you. Take your time.
Yeah.
Starting with that lens of decoloniality. I always get the word mixed up. But I guess engaging with authors like Bambara, really engaging with the decolonial authors to understand. I think there's a YouTube as well. I'll try and put it on the link of the first conference that really had different speakers come together in 2011 to talk about what's needed. Anything else, I guess, just high level?
I say
Okay.
solidarity. So if you want to make a bit of change, remember that you have some kind of power. You might be very junior in your role, but you still have power over your students, for example, right? Because we live in a colonial world where power is very hierarchical. And so if you got somewhere already, you probably have some privileges that let you be there. Obviously, a lot of hard work, but some privileges. And so what I always tend to do is try to look at that and work in solidarity with community and with others who might have different privileges or fewer privileges to me, right? So if I can include more people. So for example, Universities UK work that I did on tackling racial harassment. I was invited to be part of this role of the advisory board on racial harassment. And I looked at who was there. There was 20 people, most of them were white. And I said, I am either going to give up my role for a person of color with lived experiences of it, or we extend the advisory board to have more people of color who actually know what they're talking about when it comes to racial harassment, right? So that was my way of advocating. That was more allyship than solidarity, right? But it was working towards solidarity of inclusion. So always try to, if you can, use your privilege to expand it to others, to give it to others, right?
And just on that point, because I know what people say, I'm going to finish, but difference between allyship and solidarity, because again, that's
sure.
related. Yeah.
So allyship, very simple. Allyship is helping, dedicating yourself to a cause that you're not part of in the negative way. So white people for people of color, men for women, right? So the people with the privilege, because of that system of oppression, working to dismantle the system. And that applies to solidarity and allyship. The difference between solidarity and allyship is that allyship is much more individual. I will help an individual. I will advocate on behalf of an individual, right? And that will probably cost me nothing. And therefore, even it might make me look good because I get so many comments. Literally, I cannot count how many times I've been told, "Wow, why'd you do this work? You're white, like so amazing that you do this work." There are people of color doing this work all the time and never getting those comments. They are seen as the troublemakers, right? So allies will actually benefit from this. But it all works in very individual ways. I am sponsoring someone. I'm inviting people to events. I am introducing them to important people, but it's all very individualized. I might be challenging someone who says something racist, let's say, right? It's an individual thing. Solidarity is much more systemic. I am dedicated to it. I am ready to put my career online, well-being sometimes online, even my life online, to fight for the cause, right? I see it as not their cause, and I'm just helping. It's our cause. I understand, but I benefited from it very differently, and I am also limited by it very differently. So, for example, as a white person, I suffer from racism as well, not the same way as people of color, but my experience of the world is very much made poorer because I am not exposed to all the knowledges of the world that racism has killed, right? So whenever you try to, or patriarchy, someone who is male identified by the society, even though I don't like that, I'm very against, well, let's say I'm gender questioning, but I get a lot of benefit of it. But that's the thing. I also suffer from it because I've been put in the bracket of a man.
Right. Okay.
There's a way that I have to act as a man. I cannot cry in public, right? Which creates a lot of psychopaths, I guess, or killers. So solidarity shows us that we are all better if we work towards it, and we are all worse off if we're not. So it is working together and on a systemic level. So thinking about how we can change policies, really. Yeah.
That is what it sounds like to me, is that recognition that actually this problem isn't just a them problem, but actually it's all of us. And so yes, you come at it with that lens in your work, in how you relate with others and how you connect with others. Yeah, no, really powerful. Dom, I would like to say thank you so much for taking out the time, joining us on the podcast. It's been really insightful. If people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
What's the best way? I guess my website, and it has contacts there. So my website is DJC, like my name, Dominic Jackson Call, djctraining.com.
Awesome. Okay. And I'll put that as a link down below. All right. Well, thanks for your time. And thank you everyone for listening. I will see you next time on the next episode.